Okay, it says we're live. Hopefully, this all works like I remember. Let's see. Where are my comments? I see some comments. How do I? That's why you should not take such a long break and then forget how to do stuff. Let's see. All right, we're live. We'll give it a few minutes for people to join, and if they don't, we'll just get started talking anyway, because I know we have a lot to talk about and don't want to waste any time. All right, I see one person is joined. Where am I? Oh, there's my comment thing. Okay, so I found my little window. Let's see. Good morning. Oh, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining. Hi, Tiffany. All right, y'all gonna have to have some grace with me today because I, as you know, have been on a hiatus, so I have to relearn this little system, and they've made changes like they always do. So hopefully I can pull it all together very quickly. I will get started so that we don't waste any time. I'm going to do my intro and share my screen while I do my intro. So this is one of the conversations on intimate spaces. Good morning, good afternoon, just depending on your location. My name is Jewel Pearson, and this is Miss Bohemian Soul TV. This is Creating Home, a tiny house series, and this segment is the one of the conversations on intimate spaces. And so, getting back to every Sunday, I plan to offer some live content alternating between these conversations and doing the What's Your Question piece, where I have previously answered frequently asked questions about tiny houses. And so, kind of to give you a background on me, I built what I consider kind of a fancy tiny house in 2015. And since that time, I have shared my journey to hopefully inspire others who are interested in the movement. I do offer coaching and consultations to help people in their tiny house journey. And you can find the links to schedule with me in the video description, a shameless plug. And I serve up a lot of representation in the movement along the way. That is one of my main reasons for wanting to do this. It is my intent to build figurative and literal community that is inclusive and accessible. And I hope that if you find this information in the video helpful, that you will like it, you'll share it, you'll subscribe to the channel, and also turn on the notifications so that you know when content is available. So thank you again. Thanks for the welcome back. I appreciate it. It's good to be back. I have actually missed doing this and missed being in the conversations. And yes, Edyka is a trailblazer in this field and beyond. So I agree with that. So I say thank you and welcome. I'm going to give Edyka a chance to introduce herself again, but I just want to say thank you again for gracing me with your presence this time. If you'll remember, if you did not, if you weren't here for the launch in 2022, this was my first guest in 2022, and it kind of set the perfect foundation for everything that was to come, some great conversations. We had an amazing conversation. And so when I was planning to get started again, I asked if she would grace me with her presence again so we could get this rolling again and have some good energy. So thank you, Edyka, for doing so. So let you introduce yourself, please.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you. My name is Edyka Chilomé, and I've been using the term a reindigenizing mestiza woman, meaning by virtue of a lot of history, I've been detribalized from my traditional cultural ways, but have been called to recover those and reconnect those in my lineage. with the help of so much community and the help of so much different kinds of technologies, spiritual above all. And so there's a lot of that that is incorporated in my work as an artist, as a cultural worker, as somebody who believes in creating new visions for future, for present, and for understanding in a more holistic way a past that is so telling of what is happening now and what can happen in the future for specifically for colonized folks, BIPOC folks, folks of different diasporas, melanated peoples, particularly in the United States, but around the whole world and up and down this continent that we're on. So I am calling y'all from Lumbee territory, which is a different place and location than I was in last time I spoke to Miss Jewel. And so it has been a big journey of honoring and learning this new land, but honoring and learning all the land that I have the privilege to visit and all the peoples that have stewarded that land and that continue to make home on that land in a different way than a traditional kind of settler way. And we can talk more about what those things mean. There's a lot of vocabulary, maybe very different than what other people talk about in tiny house movements, but that's why we're here. So I am so
Absolutely.
honored to be here and so excited to get into this conversation and continuing support of this beautiful being that has been such an inspiration to so many of us. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So that was the perfect, and I got chills from your intro. Um, Perfect segue to kind of talk about the next thing that I wanted to talk about. So I took a hiatus after losing. Ooh, wow.
Mm, mm,
Um, wow, I didn't expect that. After losing Nina,
mm.
and woo, wow. I think I it was
Yeah.
important to me to sit in all the things. Losing Nina was unexpected. Wow.
Mm.
Okay, get it together.
Oh, we're holding so much space for Nina because I know how much you loved her. So,
That
and
was my
people are now
girl.
witnessing the magnitude of that love. So beautiful.
And I didn't, it was so unexpected and just really didn't understand the whole that was going to the way things happened and the whole that was going to lead for me. And so I just needed to sit in that. And I've said it was like the culmination of piles of grief, and that was just kind of the thing that
Mm,
tipped it over. And
mm,
so um, I know during that time, like I was recalibrating and kind of relocating, not physically, but mentally and emotionally, and all of those things. And I know you were doing a bit of that yourself because not so long after we talked, you then had to start figuring out a new space for yourself. And
mm,
so I want you to talk about, and I have the pleasure of having been involved in a lot of that, and
mm.
watching it unfold. But I kind of really want you to share with others that as obviously or discovering you needed to relocate and what that meant for you and kind of the journey that I know you went on before you landed here in North Carolina.
Yeah. Um, oh, I just want to hold space for Nina because we love you, Nina. And I feel like she's, going to continue to be with you always in this journey and with that house. And anyway, I just want to give thanks for
Thank
the
you.
love that
Thank you. Thank you.
our family members can offer us and how real that relationship is,
Yep.
which, is part of my journey in terms of thinking about um, how my decisions to be a tiny home dweller really were concretely planned to be a part of what I've learned from Black Southern feminist kinship economies. So within kinship economies, we are dealing with the power and the resource of deep relationship, and how deep relationship can offer us, of course, companionship and love, but actual material access to what we need. So part of my experience in my tiny house has been that when I built it, I was living on property that was owned by friends that were located in North Texas. And in that time, it was a very intense initiation into what it meant to actually invest your life in relationship, you know, where it's not a cold transactional, I pay rent to you, we sign a contract, but an actual laboring of how we relate and how we get through all of these questions about, you know, what we are envisioning, how we're envisioning existing together outside of these systems of rent, outside of the systems of tenantship, or outside of these like transactional, solely monetary economies. And so that was a really important step in my journey of like defining what that looked like for me. And so it was an interesting experience, because when I became more visible with my house, a lot of people were like, okay, well, how do you find land? How do you do this? Where do you rent space? And for me to explain that it was very contextual, it was very specific to the relationships that I had invested in and built. And that takes a lot of energy and time. It takes a lot of effort, especially because we're all a hot mess. You know, it's like, especially because we all have trauma, because we all have a lot of us have really terrible models of what it means to be in relationship because of our family infrastructures. And I'm speaking specifically as Black and Indigenous communities. You know, we have so much history that has really infiltrated the balance in our family infrastructures. So we have a lot of things to learn about how to be in right relationship, how to coexist in healthy ways. And so my journey from the beginning of my tiny house experience was investing in that kind of effort. And so my time in Texas was really important to kind of get a reality check of what that really looked like. And then I was invited to come to Lumbee territory by a Lumbee elder, Kim Pevia, who you know, works a lot in this field of somatic healing and moving our bodies and our beings into a more healthier place so that we can be in better relationship. And it has been a laborious process of trusting that that is possible between intergenerational relationships, between power dynamics in which some people in the community might have more financial wealth than others. Certainly, you know, colorism, certainly classism, certainly gender dynamics, heteronormativity, all of these things that create tension in communities when we're unequipped to really deal with them and have real conversations around conflict resolution and relating in equitable ways. So that being said, it was a whole journey for me to move my house from Texas to Lumbee land, which is the coastal plains in southeast North Carolina, what is known as North Carolina. And it has been a important journey for me to invest in relationships. And I have been so honored to invest in a deeper relationship with you. And now that we're both in North Carolina, it has been a really interesting journey for us to continue like deepening our explorations of what tiny house living means for us as people of color, as Black and Indigenous folks. And there's so much, I think, still left in the conversation to explore, certainly by us and for us. That certainly, but also the expanding representation of what tiny house moving and building and imagining looks like for people of color. And it is not the same. I mean, the one thing we concluded in all of our interactions and conversations, it's not the same for white folks to go on this journey of tiny house living. And it can't ever be, given the dynamics, the social dynamics of this culture in this country, and given the access to resource and the ways that we are able to move in the world and want to move in the world.
Yeah.
So I'll stop there because I feel like I get carried on, get hyped, but I want to make sure we're on task. So I feel like I'm gonna try to keep it concise.
Thank you. Crystal, thank you. Crystal shared that the video was freezing, so I hope it's not freezing so much that you're not able to get the conversation. Crystal, thank you. I always appreciate you being my side admin here. I appreciate you. I'm in a rural space. My internet is spotty as at best, and I now have Starlink, and it's cloudy today, so it's just like all of the things that don't make for good Wi-Fi service. So I hope we're able to um you all are able to get the gist of what's being said. And absolutely. So the kind of to talk about what you just said about it not being the same, and we're gonna explore your new location in just a second. But so background. So Edyka is just a little over an hour from me, like literally down the road. Like it's straight down the road. I live off of the same road she lives off of, and I January of 2022, we could have never envisioned that happening. So we've had the opportunity to connect and spend time together over this last year, and it's been beautiful, as I heard you say. But one of the things I wanted to mention, where you were just saying it's not the same for others in this movement, and it never will be the same. I participated in an event, a tiny house symposium, and one of the questions was, kind of what's the worst thing for you in tiny house living? And everybody else that was on the panel had something, their thing, the toilet, the this, all of those things. And for me, my answer was the worst thing for me is not feeling safe and having to have relocated my house because I have been in areas where I'm not safe as a Black person. And that is that reality, like, the mood turned a little somber, but it's but we talked about it, and they were good hosts that they wanted to talk about it. But that's the reality. I can deal with a toilet, I can deal with all of this stuff, but the safety issue is something that our counterparts aren't having to even, really consider. And that is a whole thing for Black and Indigenous folks. So before we move forward on the conversation, I do want to share um, some pics of the house, and we're not going to go into detail on pics of the house. If you haven't seen Edyka's house, you need to go back and visit the first episode where we really went in depth talking about the house and showed a lot more pictures of the house. But this is her new location. And I'm going to let you talk about the pictures. And I did throw in some other pictures of us hanging out. So go ahead, oh my goodness, Edyka, and talk about your house and location, please.
So I am in Lumbee land, which is swampland, which is really important and significant because this is sacred land to the Lumbee Confederation. The Lumbee Confederation
hold on just a second. I think I got some. I think somebody's saying there's no sound. Um, okay. Y'all hang on. Thank you. Is it still frozen? I think Crystal said it froze just as you started talking. Oh no. Um, I hear you perfectly. Uh-oh. So Crystal is saying we we hear you now. Okay, thank you. It is the weather and Wi-Fi just won't let us be great. So thank you. I'm glad you all can hear now. Edyka, I am so sorry. Um, yes. Okay. Oh, okay. So Alfonso is saying they missed right after I posed the question, so they didn't hear your response. They were able to hear me, didn't hear you. So, and she dropped a whole bunch of good knowledge. I am so sorry. Wait. Are you all saying you can't hear Edyka at all now? Or just, are you all saying you only hear me? We hear you, but the picture is still the same. Okay, so the picture hasn't changed. Edyka, go ahead and speak and tell me if you can hear her. Can you? Okay, so they're saying they're not hearing you. So hang on a second. Let's see. Hang on. Skype. Okay, hang on a second. Let's see.
Oh,
Edyka,
Jewel.
speak again
Yeah.
and see if they can hear
Hello.
you.
Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3. Testing, testing. We might have had to choose another day, Jewel, to do this because that rain is always.
Who knew it was gonna be so bad? Can you
No. Okay.
can you
Can
all
y'all
hear
hear me?
Edyka now?
Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3. Hello, hello. Hello, hello, hello.
It might have worked. It might work. I think
Can
Crystal
y'all
is
hear
saying
me
got
out
her.
there? Okay.
I appreciate y'all. So
Thank
y'all, so
you.
are we good? Okay, we're good. Okay, thank you so much. Thank y'all.
Right. Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna try to keep it short just in case it cuts out, and so we can make sure we get these answers in. So I am in what is known as Lumbee land. It is the territory where the Lumbee Confederation was recognized, and it was made up of many clans who chose to make one confederacy in order to be acknowledged by the U.S. government. Because at that time, and in many histories of clans and tribes in the United States, that has been the history. So they named themselves after the Lumber River, which runs here and which runs through this swampland. So I am nestled under an elder tree right up against the swamp. And I had mentioned previously that the swamps are really important. This is what I'm learning, living here with the Lumbee elder and living here on the land, that the swamps are the filtration system of our planet. They are so significant in the journey between the fresh waterways into the ocean, and so much of what is dumped into the natural systems of water from corporate entities is caught here in these swamplands, before it kind of continues in its journey. So it's been a really interesting landscape to witness and to learn from versus the Midwest farmland plains of North Texas. Now, certainly there are some really beautiful things about both. One of the things that has been really starkly different is when you're living up next to a swamp, it's all types of animal relatives that you have to be mindful of and that you have to coexist with. So that has been an interesting experience for me. And so I chose to nestle my home up against that elder tree, because it's really important for me to respect the land that I'm at, to do as much as I can not to disturb what is already there. So I actually parked my house on an already existing slab that was a carport, and took down the materials from the carport, 2/3 of it. And then I used that material to build up my compost system that, as you, if you followed my journey, you'll know was really significant for my build and my process of choosing not to engage with the septic system process for black water. So I have a compost toilet in my house, and now have a really beautiful compost system. So that is where I'm at, and you can see a picture of it there. And I'd have a little brief video on what that process looks like when you dump the buckets, and how it's really not as gross as you would imagine it would be if you are able to do it well. And I'm really loving the setup so far. It's, you know, like Jewel has said, every time you move, it is like a whole new experience learning your house and imagining what is primarily, it is really important for me to ask permission from the land and the caretakers of the land, the Lumbee people, for support in making choices to engage my setup, and do as little intervention as possible in what is already the landscape and the swamplands that are already so under attack by being drained from the local cities and towns and counties that apparently don't understand the significance for all of us that the swamps get allowed to exist. So I'm really honored to be up learning from the landscape. And there's me and Jewel when she came to visit me down the road. And I came to visit her up the road for a little bit, and we got to meet for the first time. And I'm just really excited to be on the East Coast again. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Um, C is saying she's glad we are back and she's in the same area. So this truly feels meant for her to see. And she's loving the history and the conversation. Thank you. Um, so Jessica is asking how you found your land, and you talked about that just a bit. Is there anything else that you can expand on? Because you talked about finding land via relationship and that type of stuff. Anything else that you can expand on?
Yeah, I think that it's really important. I was thinking about this last night, that part of my experience of decolonizing and really reorganizing my life to kind of embrace the value systems culturally and for me personally is recognizing that things aren't always immediate, right? Capitalist culture will always tell us that, you know, if you want something, get some money, you'll buy it, you know, and
Yeah.
you'll immediately have it. But the importance for me, again, with the term kinship economies, was to move at the speed of trust and really understand how to trust, and how much labor it really takes to like understand why we are
Yes.
so mistrusting of, of each other, of ourselves, of what is possible in our lives. And so when I tell people about my journey of placing my house or even getting my house, it was not necessarily a timeline in which I said, by this date I'll have this, by that date I'll have this. It was a lot of cultivating relationship. It was a lot of cultivating the healing I needed to do in myself. And when I did those things, the things came. When I did those
Mm-hmm.
things and reached and spoke and manifested through my own heart's desire by saying it and living into it, it happened. And so the land that I'm on now was really cultivated by me setting out the intention and saying, hey, is anybody out in North Carolina? Are there relationships that I can invest in? Is there space for me? And what might that space look like? And I was invited by a Lumbee elder, a native indigenous elder from these lands, to come live on her property for now. And I think that that's important because part of my journey really embodies a lot of the lessons that I myself have been working through to understand how I can be in better relationship with the land and better relationship with people. And so the way that I'm moving in this journey in my tiny house really reflects where I'm at on that timeline, not on the timeline of how much money I make to get to this next point, because it's important for me to embody those values of kinship economies. So I'll just say that. And if there's more questions, y'all can reach out to me, or you can revisit the last interview that we
The
did, because I
first
think I
episode,
talked a little bit
absolutely,
more about that. Yeah. Hmm.
absolutely. One of the things I'll share from our conversations, like one of the reminders in all of our conversation, because like what you were saying about manifesting this and envisioning this, and then when it hit, and it was just, it had checked all of the boxes, then you had to sit with it, and I had to say, hey, hey, you asked for this, because you were like, wait, I don't know if I'm supposed to be doing this. It seems so perfect. Am I supposed to trust this person? Doesn't really seem like they are trying to take anything from me. And I had to remind you a few times, no, this is exactly what you were asking for, so you need to sit in this and own it, because you were specific about what you asked for, and it showed up just like that. And then you were like, wait. Yes.
That's right. And that's what I was saying about the trust piece, that this is not
Yep.
easy.
Yep.
When we choose to remove ourselves from this transactional kind of like humanless like experience of capitalist economies, we have to be vulnerable. We really
Yeah.
have to invest ourselves in realizing that we can dream a bigger dream than that. That we can be taken care of solely because we choose to follow what our heart is calling us to follow. And that was it's still really hard. It's still really hard, Jewel. So I mean, it is important, but I do believe, I mean, and this has been co-opted by white, hippie culture, but it is part of our cultural traditions, in which when we live into our purpose, our community and our lives and our, the spirits that walk with us really open way. And that's something that, man, we have proven over and over again as we have lived through some of the hardest things that our human experience has witnessed as a species. So I really, really appreciate your accompaniment in that, and everybody who has looked out. So, I mean, it feels like a really intense thing to say, but it is very real that I've never paid rent to be on land in my whole journey in my tiny house. And so that is something that I credit to um, allowing myself to be vulnerable, allowing myself to live into the dream of kinship economies, allowing myself to build and deepen relationship and work through my own shit. Because really, like, I
That's
couldn't
it.
do any of that if it wasn't from therapy, if it wasn't for me figuring out how to move through conflict and put my ego aside, if it wasn't for me being brave enough to live into my gifts and people admire and respect about me and choose to own that power. And I am still working on it, but that is a big part of my journey. So yes.
Yeah. That vulnerability, and we've talked I we always talk about, we have these conversations, and I always laugh and I say it should be a whole episode, because we just have all of these conversations on the side. But oh, did we freeze? Do you hear me, Edyka?
I do, but
Okay.
you froze a little bit. But I can hear
Okay.
you. Can they hear us? Because we having a conversation. They
Nobody
might
has,
not be able to.
they're still talking, so nobody has said anything. But it's the vulnerability, and that's a whole separate episode. The vulnerability, and we'll probably talk a little bit about it, especially when you are used to having to navigate spaces and be hard and figure things out and do all of those things, and then when something kind of comes along and it feels easy and light and all of, and it throws you off, because it's like, okay, that's not what I'm used to. I'm used to hardness, and I'm used to struggle in a way in figuring the things out. And so this 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 conversation is, a reminder of ease and abundance, and it doesn't always have to be hard work. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
or at least the hard work that we are accustomed to, like you're saying, because like I just finished saying, and as you witnessed, it has been really hard for me.
Oh yeah.
You
Yeah,
know, so
absolutely.
but it's a different kind of work that softens us, that allows us to really shift our value system and imagine what is possible, as opposed to the constant grind that never seems to have an
Mhm.
end point, right?
Mhm.
Whereas, you know, like my elder Kim says, my auntie Kim says, she's like, either way, it's going to be painful to get it out the
Right.
mud and move through this grind culture and work as hard as you can till you die, or to move through what is really uncomfortable to build community and build relationships and build vulnerable and dependent on others and community. But one of them ultimately has the potential to transition into an easier process. The other one might get you to having some money at some point, but you're still gonna end up in some white neighborhood feeling lonely and feeling unfulfilled and feeling
Yeah.
uncomfortable with your own self and your own life. So it's like, what choice do you want to make? Do you want to invest in being softened and getting really uncomfortable and allowing other people to see the raggedy sides of you? Or do you want to continue grinding and being detached from the abundance that you can manifest without having to continuously play this rat race game? And I know me and you have talked a lot about the desire to get out of one, move into the other, but that transition takes time, right? It takes time
Mhm.
for so many different reasons. But in the meantime, and taking it back to this really beautiful, vulnerable moment you shared with us earlier, there's so much love we can learn in baby steps from animal companions that can show us how to soften, show us how to be in love, and show us how to move. And I say that because I am so in love with my dog too, who has helped me so much understand what love can really look like and what joy it can bring in my life. Because Lord, humans can be a hot mess. We are a hot mess, and you know, and that's part of the reason why this becomes hard work. But yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I do have to say, I do have a another four-legged little friend in here, and her name is Brooklyn Simone, and she is actually Nina Simone's granddaughter. And Brooklyn has made it clear since she arrived, she is not her grandmother. And so she is giving me a whole run for my money. And there is nothing about her that is reminiscent of Nina, except they look alike. That's it, because Brooklyn is her own little journey. So we're trying to make these things work out. But transitioning from that, I want to there was a question that we talked about in depth in the first episode, where I one of the questions that I asked was whether you saw yourself as part of this tiny house movement, or did you just live in a tiny house? And we talked about that in depth in that episode. But what I want to talk about now is kind of the tiny house remix of that. You know, I'm always on a tiny house remix, but knowing your journey over this last year, I kind of think and know that you see that differently now, a little bit differently from where you were a year ago, and I want you to talk about that.
Yeah, I think different in the sense that what I already explored and shared of like how hard it really is to build community and live into this vision of what it means to be in kinship economies and community, but also so significant and even more urgent now, a year later, is the importance that I think a lot of my generation and younger really feel of like what it means to divest from extractive systems that continue to not only hurt us, right, as humans, as working class peoples, as people of color, as women, as queer folks, but that continues to make our existence on this earth as human beings really difficult because of the ways that we're treating the land in the same ways that we've been treated as people of color, as women, as queer folks. And so, when we see a predominantly white tiny house movement that is like, oh, I'm a minimalist, or oh, they may have a compost toilet, or they might catch rainwater. These things are cool, and they're like niche-y, and they're like kind of like hot topics for the moment. But for us as younger generations of colonized peoples, people of color, this is not just a niche or a lifestyle. It is our survival that we're talking about. It is the survival of our communities, of our people, of our beings, of the things that we care about on this land, of future generations. And so, the tiny house movement as it stands is a very white male-led narrative, doesn't incorporate the urgency that there is in terms of the urgency of our survival. So, and urgency to keep our souls intact, Jewel. I mean, that is the extremities when we talk about divesting from the grinds and having to constantly get it out the mud and like constantly have to fight to even have the basic accessibility of our lives. This is even heightened even more so for us. Particularly as women who choose to live independently, particularly as people of color, descendants of enslaved and massacred peoples. So there is an importance that we highlight, like, this is not a new fad. This is us getting back to our humanity, back to our values, back to the necessity to be in relationship with the land, because otherwise our species will not survive this turning. It will not survive. White systems of capitalist extractive industry will fall. It is not sustainable. They have said it themselves. It is not sustainable. So we can either choose to go down with them, or we can choose to step back into what we know to be true, that we need to be in relationship with each other. We need to be in relationship with the land, and we need to focus and center what is really important. And that is not a material industry, profit-driven system. It is an industrious, creative way of coming back to each other and ourselves. So that is what this means to me. And it becomes deeper and deeper and deeper each day that I wake up in this little house and I say, damn, I'm crazy as hell, or I am really on the right track, and people are going to see that, and I'm going to find more of my own people. And that's the latter has been most days. And so I'm really, really grateful to be in this community and everybody watching, for y'all to have reached out to this point, to follow Miss Jewel on her journey. I know that you feel a lot of what I'm saying. So I just appreciate the connection, the community we've been building around Miss Jewel's visibility and choice to be vulnerable and visible in our spaces and in the white tiny house movement. So just so much respect to you, Jewel, for real, for real.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. What, if anything, like if there were two things that since we last spoke, two or three things since we last spoke, new that you may have discovered about yourself, if anything, since over this last year, this new journey? Then maybe there's nothing.
Yeah, I think I'm a lot further along than I give myself credit for in this journey.
I would agree with that.
And I think that is a frequency that we all have like connection to. I think that we're always underplaying our abilities, underplaying what we've already achieved in life. And so the older that I get, the more I feel like I need to give myself more credit for where I'm at. And the more that I get to live into my house, because it's just like any other house. I thought at some point a year ago that I had settled in, but I continue to settle in with all these little details that make me feel more at home with myself and with my house and with my life. Because again, like, this whole show is about, it's not about the tiny house, really. It's about what the tiny house reflects. So the more that I grow, the more the tiny house becomes more like home for me and more beautiful to me. So I really have been living into that and honoring that. And, you know, that I don't need to have it all together all at once. Because when I got my house, I was so like, I need to have it all right now, you know, and living into the patience that it takes to really do that has been more significant to me over this last year.
Thank you, Sandra. Um, I would say that. I would also say if my observation, and we talked about that, is the softening part of it has
Mm.
been, I've seen change in you over the last year, the softening. And so that I know is different from when we first connected. Um,
Yeah.
it's interesting that you speak to that about growing into your house and changing into your house. And I can absolutely say that. Like, this is year 8 for me. And a friend said to me just yesterday, she was saying that she had watched my latest interview on HGTV Handmade, and so she said she could see a difference in me, just overall, like my energy around my house from the first interviews that I had
Mm.
done years ago, and just how I've changed. And I definitely can say the same. Like, this whole journey has, changed and morphed me into something different. And it's changed as per location. It's always a change. There's a lot of change that happens if you're and really why I want to have these conversations, because it's not really just about a house. It is about a whole living within the house, but it's not just about like the aesthetics of the house, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I can definitely see that. So, one of the things that I mentioned I wanted to talk to you about, because it's Black History Month, and so we've been Black and Indigenous, since we started this conversation. But it's also the month of love, supposedly. And so, one of the things that I always get asked about and people want to talk about is love and dating in tiny houses. And I don't have much to contribute to that conversation. But one of the things, and so I want you to kind of talk about it, but one of the things that I always get hit with is, I'll have comments on some of my posts from men who say, you're leading, this is like this lifestyle because I live in a tiny house, you're leading women in the wrong direction. This is the type of mentality that is not good for our young women. Where's your husband? All of those things. And it doesn't bother me anymore as it used to. But I was single when I had a big house. I was married at one point. I got a divorce. I've dated, but I was single when I had a big 4-bedroom, 3-bath house. So that is the journey. That's the reality of singleness. And so you and I have talked about this, and I shared with you how you end up holding space for different things. I remember my Nook space when I first did the Nook, and I had 2 chairs there because it was like, okay, if I intend to have dinner with somebody, and then after a while I'm like, okay, this is a tiny house, space is at a premium, let me get this chair out of here because I could use this space. So and but it is intentional that I'm not making space for somebody. But if that happens, then in my mind, you figure out what that looks like, and you again tiny house remix it and figure out what that looks like if there is to be space shared. So that is my background of this, but I want to give it. You're way younger and have a different, broader view. So I want to open it up to you to speak to that. And I think you might have frozen. Do you hear me?
I
Oh, there
can
you
hear
are.
you. Can you hear me?
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. I want to hear
Um,
your thoughts on this.
yes. So I mean, I'm what? I'm 32. So there's definitely an age difference between me and you. I have not
Right.
been married. And I actually have been out as a queer woman since I was 17, 18. So I have my trajectory of imagining my life in partnership has been very different. I've never had any illusions of being married or having a husband, or even the actual manifestation of a traditional single a family home. So, you know, my journey as a very migrant, a migrating indigenous person. Both of my parents are from south of the border. We are a family of migrating people. Indigenous peoples all over have always migrated. So the idea of being in a tiny house with wheels wasn't really a big stretch for me to imagine, knowing that I would be traveling and moving in this life and on these lands and on this earth for a a big portion of my life. And in that, knowing that I would embody and be open to different kinds of loverships, relationships, connections. But certainly when I set out to build this house, and me and you have talked about this a lot, when I set out to build this house, it was a really radical and important statement in my own life to build a home that was just for me, that was for me, not anybody else, not accommodating anybody else, but a space that was just for me, which is something that I know at least the last three generations of women in my family could have never imagined. Never imagined to have a space where they could wake up and do it what they wanted with their bodies and be free and independent in that way and enjoy the softness and the ease that life could give them. So this house is really an offering to myself and all those women in my lineage that never got to have that. And it didn't even occur to me to make space for someone else in this house. Now, I have been in a lovership partnership for the last 2 years. And this person comes to my house and respects that it is my house and shares this space with me when I feel comfortable to do so. And it's cute because as lovers, we can be really cozy together. But this is still my house and it will always be my house. And I don't think that, for me, in my opinion, that only really angers people that are attached to this idea that as women, we're not allowed to have our own spaces.
Right,
That's my perspective.
right, right,
That's not to respect women who would prefer not to, would love to be in a space and a house that they share with someone else. And the great part is you can find that and you can build that and you can design that and you can choose that. But I think that my choice to be in my house and to invite love in a very particular way is my kind of intimacy with myself and my life. So I really love that about my lifestyle. And I'm also open. I'm not so attached that this house will be where I always live forever and ever and ever in this way. Because
right.
as you say, we're constantly changing and we're constantly evolving. I mean, your house, just watching your journey with your house, you've changed your house so much since since the last 8 years. And so for me, it's like, okay, well, if my boo wants to, pull up their own little tiny house structure, we can build a whole connecting unit. That's the beauty of
Exactly.
imagining, expanding and changing and remixing our lives. That is always an option.
Exactly.
And also
Exactly.
this idea that like we could have multiple homes where we feel safe, where we have community, where we have different satellites, where we can recharge and we can spend seasons and years of our life. So I feel like there is so much opportunity for us to continue building homes, and that home doesn't have to be stuck in one place in
Hmm.
one form. As much as I love my house, my idea of home is not limited to these walls and this little tiny trailer. So I really want to encourage, particularly overall women and femme folks, that this idea of living autonomously for ourselves and offering us the luxury and ease and the space to be, not always having to perform for whatever virtuous or expected relationship we're supposed to be yearning for, that this can be a journey of us manifesting a home for our internal interpersonal journey. And so yeah, I think that is a radical form of love that we need to be investing in, that relationships clearly will not, this very heteronormative, monogamous kind of idea of marriage is not going to save us from anything. It's supposed to be a journey of us learning how to be more human, more accessible to our own hearts. And so I really think it's a beautiful journey to be on as a single woman. So I don't want anybody to think that it's not possible to get you some in a
Absolutely.
tiny house. Because listen, there's a lot of possibility around how you design a house. And I may or may not have thought about that when I was designing how to
Listen,
physically be in the house with somebody for those
listen,
reasons.
listen. To
But
to not have that in consideration would be a waste of physical wood. That reminds me of when I first um was like before I was even designing my house. There's a story of this couple in the area who had built a tiny house, and it had a picture of them in their home, and they had an A-frame roof, and they were sitting kind of on the edge of the loft. And in the article they were talking about the house, and they said they were husband and wife, and then as they described their house, they said something about how only one of them could sit up in the loft at a time. And I was sitting there thinking, this is why people think tiny house people are crazy. Like, you're married, you live in this tiny house, and only one person can sit up at a time in the loft, and you all are okay with saying that, and people are like, that's not sustainable. And no, it's not sustainable. That's just that's dumb as hell. So absolutely. Absolutely. So I appreciate that perspective, because I'm always the comments like, it's clear why you're single, and it's just like, no, but I designed a house for me. I've been single. I'm single. I date, but I've been single. So why would I build this futuristic house based on perhaps I'll get a husband, or, perhaps I, need to do this because I'm going to have this person in my space. No, you figure that out, as it happens. So anyway, thank you. Thank you for sharing that perspective. What else? What else can we talk about? Is there what's something that you want to talk about that I haven't asked? Is there anything I've missed that you want to share? Since we last caught up, that you didn't get a chance to talk about.
I'm really proud of myself for keeping it so concise, because we had an hour mark and I feel like we got through everything we want to get through. So I would love if you want to spend a few more minutes or a little bit more time, if anybody watching has questions, because I always think that is important to incorporate. People who are in the conversation want to be in the conversation. So I'd be open to asking folks that are watching in the chat to pose questions if they want to. What do you think?
So I like that. The only questions that I saw that I know we didn't answer were specific to our housing setups. And so the one of the questions was about whether we had electricity or solar, and then whether there was well water. So I know, I'll let you answer first, and then I'll answer for me.
Yeah, so in my first setup, I have always been connected to the grid for electricity, mostly because my resources. I've been researching kind of alternatives to even solar, because solar panels and systems are actually very highly pollutant in their process of construction, and they're actually only
Okay.
used and able, their lifespan is pretty short, maybe 10 to 12 years. And so one of the things that I did in my build was make sure that if I needed to live without electricity, that I could. So I have a wood burning stove in my house that I can cook off, I can use for heat. And I designed my windows to offer ventilation through the house, for that to also be an accessible, non-electric driven kind of way of cooling the space down, and having ventilation. So, but my water system in my previous parking spot, I collected rainwater, which was a journey of learning how to create that full system. And it was a lot of different learning curves for me, but definitely was possible, and definitely felt a lot more healthy, honestly, than the county water that was there where I was living. So I really enjoyed that. I still haven't set up my rainwater system here on my spot, but part of my intention with my design was to not have so many things. So if I have a way to plug in, and if I have water accessible that I can catch or that I can filter, I don't need a septic system. I don't run my house on any kind of gas. And so those were the things that were really important in my design, to keep as simple as possible. I saw somebody comment on wind power. This is something I've looked into, not as extensively, but there has been things that I've thought about in terms of disrupting the currents that are so important for our winged relatives, for a lot of the different other animals and ecosystems that live and coexist with us. So a lot of those big windmills that are kind of industrious, that are really high up in the sky, they can cause disruption in some of the migratory patterns for birds, and that's something I'm really sensitive to too. But if there's more information around that anybody has or is willing to offer and investigate, I would love to learn some more about that.
I love conversations with you because I always learn something as well. Because the young people, they always researching and knowledgeable. So I appreciate that. Um, my house runs on electricity, and I have well water, and I am having to consider alternate systems because one, I know as systems are changing and going down, I want to have a backup myself so that I'm not dependent on the grid. But I have to figure out what that looks like. And I also have to figure out, from a financial perspective. Anybody that follows me personally knows that as I shared a story on Facebook of getting home last night and the power was out for quite like about 3 or 4 miles around me. So it was pitch black, and black like I've never seen black before night. And it was quite an experience and scary because out here there was no moon, there was no starlight, there was nothing. I don't even think, look, you know how they always say it's so dark sometimes black people can't see their hands. I don't even think white people could have seen their hands last night. That's how dark it was out here. And so I had a whole experience trying to figure out how to get from my car to the door in this dark. And so the alternate systems have been on the lower down on my priority list, but they got bumped up last night because I was like, okay, I need to come up with a plan. And I will be honest, if Brooklyn had not been in the house, I would have done a U-turn and found me a hotel because it was scary. But anyway, so that is the thing that I have to figure out. I am on well water, and I have filters on the well, but I still also have to. The water here is still, I think, really mineral heavy, and I'm still trying to figure that out. That was the one question I saw, and then there's another question that was asking how far you are from a city center, even if it's a small city / town.
Okay, that's a good question. So, and it's definitely relevant to both me and you, Jewel, because we live in rural settings. So I was about in my parking spot. So I've always lived out in rural areas in my house. In my first spot in Texas, I was about 25 minutes from the closest town, and about an hour and a half away from the biggest city outside of Dallas. And now I'm in a small town, but I'm talking about a small, we ain't even got a Walmart here, so I don't know if it counts. There's a post office. There's a post office and a few lights. But the closest city is about an hour away. So I don't think I could imagine myself being more than an hour and a half away from a big city. And not necessarily a big, huge city, because even the city I'm closest to is not that big. But I think I'm still in that transition of like figuring out how to not want to go get some vegan snacks at Trader Joe's every once in a while. Yeah, so that there's that. But I do think that, when I feel called to be on the land more permanently and start growing my own food in a more major way, because I grow a few things here and there. But I feel like I'll be more invested in figuring out how to replace some of the things that I like the convenience of going to a store to get. So that's still the part of the transition that will inevitably, I feel like, come from me personally. So.
Yeah, yeah. And so for me, I also am in a very small area and I am about 45 minutes outside, 45, 50 minutes outside of Charlotte. And so there's nothing around me either. But that kind of segues into Jessica was asking a question about what do you recommend as far as how far out one should set up? Is there a benefit to living away from civilization but close enough to still run into town if need be? And my answer to that, so I am very much a city girl, but because until tiny houses are really legalized, location is determined by where you can, if you're kind of under the radar, where you can go and make home. And so that is, basically the answer. And Edyka has several more reasons, like wanting to be on the land. My years ago, I really wanted to be in the city because I needed to be connected to the city energy. I don't say that as much now, even though I would like to be a little bit closer because I still am back and forth in the to the city a lot, and it has its pros and its cons, but a lot of it is right now predicated by the legalities of locations for tiny houses.
And I will say for me, another factor has been, through the pandemic, I definitely made a choice to go with friends out onto land in the rural areas because it just felt safer to kind of be in a less populated area because of this global pandemic that happened. And I still am very much appreciative of living farther out from the city in a less populated area because of that. Even still, even though most folks think, the pandemic is over, the reality is that as we continue overcrowding each other and destroying landscapes and ecosystems, different diseases will continue to become a thing. Lyme disease, all these things that are created through climate catastrophe, human caused climate catastrophe, will continue to be a thing. And, like we saw in Texas while I was living there, the grid continues to be overextended and companies and governments continue to not invest in making those things sustainable. So eventually, depending on what zip code or area code you live in a city, it will become less and less easy to live there, is my opinion. And so that was part of the reason why it was really important for me to make this shift to be in more autonomous and have more control over my immediate needs. So this is again back to my whole sharing earlier of like, we're talking about more than convenience. We're talking about survival, right? More and more.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Mm-hmm.
more less and less a romanticized notion of wanting to live out in the woods like a little fairy, and more how do we keep ourselves safe? How do we make sure that we have control over what we need and not waiting on people that clearly have shown over and over again they do not care about humans, and they definitely don't care about humans that look a certain kind of way. So there's a need for us to regain kind of at least an understanding of what it means for us to access the things that we need more immediately. And that may mean, okay, maybe I don't need Trader Joe's, but I do need water and I do need clean water. So those are the things that we're wrestling with now, and things that are really important to me. So I do find myself in a place where I do not have a desire to live in a city again. I'm not saying that won't change at some point, but for now, it feels really important for me to continue investing in learning how to be more autonomous.
Yeah, yeah. Um, well, I had something I was gonna say to that, but oh, I was gonna say, yeah, I definitely, during the pandemic, as the pandemic hit and we went into quarantine, that was when I was looking for a new location for my tiny house and had to be in the apartment for a while. And I truly missed um, being in my tiny house because there was a safety aspect that I was missing in not being right up and around people. So I can totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Crystal said it's freezing here and there again. Thank you, Crystal. Okay, so we'll entertain one last question, and then we're going to wrap this up. I would definitely encourage you to revisit episode 1 if you kind of want more details and specifics about Edyka's journey to her house, her build, all of those things. To get, we had I think the conversation might have been an hour and a half. So be sure to revisit. It was episode 1 in the conversation series. So be sure to revisit that. And so there was one more question. Felicia is asking, how long were you without power and who did you contact to find out? So in my area all week, they've been, I think, rerunning the electric um, lines down up and down the road. So they've been doing that all week. And as I was coming into the area, I was behind an electric truck that was coming out to check on it. So I knew it was area wide and there wasn't anything for me to do. So and the power, I was coming in around 11:30, 12 o'clock ish, and the power didn't come back on until 4 a.m. ish. Somebody didn't do something right in the work that they were doing. So, but fortunately, the lights came back on. But it was a whole trip in me trying to figure out how to get the 15 feet from my car to my house, my front door, my decision making process. So the last question I want to entertain before we call it a afternoon is, how do you secure your homes? Anything you've learned that you would share with other single brown and black women going tiny? You want to take that first and I follow up?
Uh, I'm not sure I understand secure your home. Like, get the home, maybe is what I'm gonna interpret that as.
I'm kind
Um,
of thinking I saw it as safety.
um, yeah,
Jessica, give us I saw it as safety. Or are you talking about physically securing the home? If you
like
can
financially or
kind of
building it.
expand on what you were thinking.
If it's safety, I know me and Jewel have different perspectives on different things around safety. One of the things that I was committed to in my home as a single young brown woman living in this house by myself out on the land was getting a dog that I keep close to me most of all time, 24/7. And she's definitely more of a protective dog, and she's a good size. And she'll take somebody out if I need her to, and that makes me feel generally just safer. I also I keep a baseball bat and my chitas by each door and in my car, and there are things that I do for my own safety. If it is about but also living by yourself on the land in the dark, like Miss Jewel just went through. That, I mean, you're gonna have to just get used to like having to do shit like that, right? Having to like be by yourself and be isolated a little bit and like figure shit out and get brave. And also, I feel like that has been so good for me generally and continues to be an empowering thing. But and I know Jewel has so many different stories about how she's had to embolden herself and confront some fears, especially as a Black woman. So, but I'll just
Yeah,
say before she gets to that I have never lived on land completely by myself. So I think that is really
right.
important to say. I feel like, I've had my house kind of on property that was a little isolated for privacy, but I still always had somebody on the property that I trusted and somebody that was a friend to me. So that's also part of the conversation around being in community, right? That like we need to be able to feel safe on property and on land, especially if we're living in rural areas where racism continues to be and has always been very rampant. So, having different people that have different access points to dealing with whiteness and maleness, I think is also a strategic form of how we build community and how we think about living into these visions of tiny house communities with each other. And certainly, like, I'm a big proponent for having animal solidarity. My dog has been a big use in that way. And people in our countries and our communities have always had dogs to be protective. And I think that that is something that we should honor and recognize, that is accessible to us and really teaches us how to be in relationship and in solidarity with each other, with other animals. So that's what I'll say. But it has been a little like, okay, I gotta pay attention and I gotta learn my surroundings. What we say in Spanish, we got to be trucha, we got to be smart. So that's something that always comes without saying for all of us, and that we know that in our bodies, but it's not different, living in a tiny house. I think some people feel more secure being in an apartment or in a neighborhood, but even that can be so unsafe, maybe even more
Yeah,
unsafe in some ways. So I think it's really evaluating, what the dangers are in context, and to develop a trust in our own intuition and our own capacity, which could be a whole other interview around intuition and our believing our capacity. But
absolutely.
certainly it's part of the journey.
Absolutely. Yeah. So Jessica did follow up and said she was asking about security and safety. And someone said keep a flashlight with you at all times. And so absolutely. There were some lessons learned for me yesterday because even I had not experienced complete darkness out here, like, miles and miles. Usually there's a light off in the distance or something like that. um but it was complete darkness, for miles and miles around, and so that was a different type of darkness. And I do have a roadside safety kit in the car that has a major flashlight in it, but and lesson learned, that kit is in the back of the truck, in the back of my truck. So that also meant to get my kit, I had to get out in the darkness and go back there and find it. So lesson learned, keep that up a little bit closer so that I have access to it. And it was so dark out here, like, you have your little flashlight on your phone, and I got out here to put my flashlight, and my joke on my page was like, the dark was like, girl, please, that light is nothing out here. Because it was like, you don't even have a light on, that's how dark it was. So I really said out loud, God, okay, so this is what we're doing, because I got to get out this car. And there is always efforts and braveness. It's just like, there's stuff out here that on four legs that I sometimes hear. So, it's just thinking through all of the things. But having said that, I would not trade being able to be in my home for anything different. I would not trade that for sure. Um from a safety perspective, I have been in this journey for 8 years, and I've had some not so pleasant experiences with racism. I've had experiences with people coming on property that should not have been on the property, coming to the door. I've had neighbors who've introduced themselves to me as rednecks, and I felt like they were giving me a message. You're introducing yourself to me as a redneck. So all of those things, and I've had to watch as people are on the property, and I was the only person out on this particular property. So I quickly had to learn that I'm a small dog person. And I quickly had to learn, coming from a perspective of I've never had a firearm before. I quickly had to learn that either I'm going to be a sitting duck or I'm going to learn how to protect myself. So I've done the classes. I've got a concealed carry license, and I actually now have a weapon. And I've never ever been a gun person, but I've had to learn that if I'm going to do this journey and I'm going to live in this house and sometimes be in these rural spaces, I have to be able to protect myself. And so that was a new concept for me. But I also have a ring camera system, cameras on my house, and the app that you can kind of see what's happening. So, those are all of the things that you do um, in a traditional home, and you just really still have to be even more mindful in rural spaces. And that's it. What else? Somebody is saying hi to you, Edyka. Chris Taylor is saying hi to you. Jessica, oh,
Uh,
head on swivel. Absolutely. Always head on swivel.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's it. I think we've talked about everything that I mean, we could go on and on and on, but I think we've talked about everything that we had planned to talk about. As always, I thank you, thank you, thank you. For being in conversation, and because we're down the road from each other, you might see more from us, because just because we can, like I shared some pictures. We've had a couple of times where she'll reach out and just be like, I'm on my way in your area, what you want for lunch? And so we've had an opportunity to have lunch and hang out, and so that's been really nice to be able to share to share space and all of those things. And absolutely, yes, Crystal, I have motion lights. But again, last night all of the power is out, and because it's been raining, my solar lights were like, girl, we're not working tonight. So it was everybody was done. And so it was a total experience getting in the house. So anyway, I lived to tell about it, and there were some lessons learned of how I need to do things a little bit differently, and I get to laugh about it this morning. So and I'm safe. So that was that. So thank you so much. Let me do my little outro in a minute, but thank you, darling. Thank you so much. Uh-oh. Siri wants to talk. Siri, be quiet. If I needed you, Siri, he wouldn't even be here. Um, Thank you as always. Thank you for helping me relaunch this thing. Thank you for reminding me why I started this journey, this conversation series, and how and why it's so important that we have these conversations and that we see ourselves in this movement, and see our Black and brown faces, and talk about this movement from a perspective of how we navigate all of these systems and spaces, and because that's important, because other people want to understand this, and it's not something that they're able to readily see in the larger movement. So I thank you, and I thank you for sharing at the level that you do. And I look forward to all of the things that you're going to do in this movement, and as we figure out how we move along in this journey together. I thank you for all of those things. And thank you to everybody who joined us today. I appreciate you all showing back up after I have been absent. I thank you for the love notes that you all have sent to say that you missed this conversation and missed us and missed me and all of the things. And I appreciate the love for sure. And I think grief and that's a whole different conversation, but and it's probably something that we'll talk about at some point, because there, sometimes you just got to sit still in it and regroup, and I really needed to do that. So let me do my outro. I will talk to you in a bit, Edyka. Thank you all very much for joining this morning, this afternoon, and thank you for working with us through the technical issues. There's always some of that, but it wasn't. We figured it out, and hopefully the sun will be shining next time. We won't have all of those issues. So thank you, thank you, thank you, everyone. Again, this is Miss Bohemian Soul TV. This is part of a series that I am going to relaunch and get back on point with. This is the part of the conversations on intimate spaces. And this is where we have conversations and we focus less on the actual tiny house and more on the people and their journeys within the movement, and talking with people in and around the tiny house movement. The second piece of this installment is the What's Your Question, where I answer some of the frequently asked questions that are asked of me, and I share tips to help someone in or on their tiny house journey. And so this is Sundays at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. And I hope you'll join us. And again, if this video was helpful to you, please like it, share it, tell your friends about it. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and then turn on the notification so that you'll know when new content is available. And so I thank you, thank you, thank you, Edyka. We will talk in just a few minutes. Thank you all very much for joining. Everybody have a great day.